Herbs. Thank you for being here tonight. I'm Kelly Taylor, and well, I figured we'd start out with some like really popular herbs for tonight's talk. Thank you, Dustin, for the laugh. Appreciate that. But I am actually I'm an elementary school teacher, so first off, I appreciate your cameras being on. Everyone turns their cameras off, and you don't have to ask to use the bathroom. You don't have to raise your hand. Just let me know. But why am I doing this talk? Well, I think everyone should try herbal brewing like at least once. It's really easy to add into what you're already doing. So in this talk, we're going to talk about why you should try herbal brewing, the history of brewing with herbs, including women in herbal brewing, and then kind of down to the nitty gritty, when and how much to use. I pulled off some charts out of the books that are really helpful, and then looking at recipes, and then just where I got my resources from. So start out with a quote. Let me get my quote ready. God made yeast as well as dough and loves fermentation just as he loves vegetation. Ralph Waldo Emerson. So reasons to love herbal brews if you don't already. First off, it's new tastes and experiences. So this is not something you're going to see on all the taps, maybe just one tap or maybe like one section in the bottle store. And then for me, a lot of it's learning history through brewing, going back to our very first beers. Another part is waste not. A lot of us are already growers. We already have an herb garden. We're already in a good growing place. So waste not, want not. And part of that is locally grown. I mean, we're really lucky to live by Yakima with all those hops, but really anything grows great here. Lots of health benefits. Some are proven, some are not. We'll get into that tonight, whether they're true or not. It's garden inspiration, well, at least for me. So like I think, oh, I'd love to make this kind of beer. I can't get this ingredient. Maybe I can grow it. Something to grow. And then also for hop intolerant drinkers, if you have any friends that are like, oh, I love beer, but I get all itchy, maybe they're allergic to hops and you could brew something for them. So what's in a name? So the term is Gruit. I actually don't call most of my beers Gruits that have herbs in them, unless it kind of fits the historical name. So I would call most of my beers like lemon balm, pale ale, or whatever the base style is. But historically, Gruit's a term used in an area in like the Netherlands, Belgium, Western Germany. But of course, you can use it today for anything that has herbs or seasoning in it. So if you want to call it a Gruit, you can. If not, that's fine. It's only from one area of the world. A lot of the common Gruit herbs historically are sweet gale, mugwort, yarrow, ground ivy, horehound, and heather. Some other countries don't call theirs Gruits. They have specific names for them. So like the Sati in Finland, we wouldn't call it a juniper Gruit. We'd call it a Sati instead, since it's a historical style. Right, so on to, and I have notes, so I apologize if I'm looking back and forth. This is the part where really, thank you for letting me give this talk, where like I really had to do more research, is more into like the history of herbs, and then the recipes, that's kind of my fun stuff. So I have lots of notes for the history. So historically, herbs were used to stabilize beer. It retards spoilage, it increases the palatability, and it covers a lot of brewing failures, especially medieval beers or even more ancient beers, not the tastiest ones. It imbues the beer with medicinal qualities, and it also makes the beer stronger, more sedative, or more hallucinogenic. Why did we switch to hops? Well, there's a little bit of history, partly because of taxation, but also partly because hops are just a really good herb. So it's not that it's like, boo, hops. It's more like, that's a really good herb to use. So before the use of hops, herbs like sage, rosemary, bog myrtle were also used for antiseptic properties. It's going to be the same with juniper branches in Norway. They're used in the filter and mash. They also are antiseptic. Let's see, in Northern Europe, we have sweet gale, yarrow, wormwood, heather, horehound, stinging nettle, buckbean, ash trees, spruce fir. They're also used for bittering agents. There's lots of indigenous brews that use whatever is local all around the world. So just for millennia, we've been brewing beer, and then we get into where things are going really good. We have the Protestants brewing beer, we have the Catholics brewing beer, and that led to the monopolization of Gruit herbs. So that was either a taxation or a limit on who could use Gruit herbs. In addition to the Reinheitsgebot purity order, it affected herbal brewing. So in 1487, Bavaria decided to do this, and was totally adopted by 1516. The only ingredients that could be used while producing beer were water, barley, and hops. The Reinheitsgebot also set the price of beer. It limited profits made by innkeepers and confiscated any impure beer that was made. So that would include beer that is not made with hops or is made with herbs. The purity order was also used to prevent plants that were allegedly used in like pagan rituals. So that would be ones like gruit, belladonna, wormwood, and henbane. The order also prevented problematic preservatives like soot, stinging nettles, and henbane, because that's quite poisonous. More recently, herbs have become more popular, and even by the mid-1500s, Bavaria started to allow ingredients like coriander, bay leaf, and wheat. And really recently, Gruit herbal beers have made a resurgence. More home brewers and more microbreweries are finding old recipes and making new recipes. Oh, I didn't write anything on this page. Oops. So part of that history, and a lot of that history, is really the history of women brewers. So traditionally, brewers were mostly women. Beer is one of the oldest beverages, and at the start of brewing, it was really the realm of female brewers. Women were responsible for household and food preparation chores, with fermentation of foods or drinks being one of those chores. That includes keeping a garden, like working in the kitchen. Those were just regular activities. So as the cooks and the healers of their community, women had a lot of knowledge about plants, which ones were good for cooking and which ones were good for common ailments. And then using those in creams or ales or syrups. But by the 2nd century, brewing had become popular just throughout all of Western Europe. And then starting to move into monasteries. So now monasteries are the primary brewers. And by the 14th and 15th century, brewing had moved to commercial breweries. Women gradually found themselves throughout time being kind of pushed out of the brewing community. And this gets into an interesting part, which is why I chose this photo. So witch trials began to spring up throughout Europe, and anti-witch propaganda used Brewster symbols to vilify women with healing knowledge, are women brewers that brewed with herbs. Some common tropes about witches come from this time that we still use today. So examples would be like large cauldrons for brewing became like a witch's brew. Broomsticks marking where the alehouse is are now witches' broomsticks. Tall pointed hats that were used to distinguish the ale sellers in the market became witches' hats. And even the cats that were used to chase the mice away from the grains became part of witch imagery. Perhaps it was the fear of economic independence or the fear of botanical knowledge, but female brewers became a thing of the past by the 1700s. The rise of microbreweries and just home brewing in general has really opened and given room for women brewers to kind of rejoin their place here today. And so I'm really pleased to kind of be involved with the Women's Brewer Cup, or even like She Brew last year. And this is a great group to join. So just taking a look at that, more specific examples. This is actually Martha Washington's Mead recipe. This book was passed down from her mother-in-law down to her. So it may have been one of her recipes or her mother's recipe. And so just looking at the herbs in it, we've got bay, we've got hyssop, which is a type of mint, and we've got rosemary and honey and water. Sounds delicious. So getting into details where we find ingredients. I'm a big advocate of you should grow it if you have the space. If not, we live in a great place for foraging. Make sure you know where to forage. Farmers markets are really good places. And then just where we live, there's a lot of Asian markets, Mexican markets, like Ukrainian markets that have those specialty herbs that you might be looking for. Or even like specialty tea shops. I know there's like one in University Place. And then online, we live in a great time to find things. So for foraging, usually what I'm looking for on my hikes, I'm looking for ferns. You can brew with ferns, mushrooms. This is one book I'll talk about tonight. This is the Wild Crafting Brewer, but he's got some good mushroom recipes in here. And of course, our Christmas beers with spruce and fir, yarrow, clover, flowers. Online, there's some good guides you can download for like what's in the area if you're going on a hike. So you can look for those plants and research them ahead of time. What's in my garden? So this is really number one. You should grow it if you can. I like a big English style overgrown garden with everything. Some of the plants I'll mention tonight are invasive. I really don't care because I'm just going to mow it over. But if you do have a tight space or a manicured lawn, check and make sure it's not invasive first, because those are plants on my list. So some examples, ones I do specifically for brewing or for wine. I've got borage, hollyhock and marshmallow, chamomile, yarrow. I'm really excited about this year. I know John Hawking has some good plants at his house too. We've been talking about that. And just ideas. So something I haven't experienced with, I don't have much experience with, but because I do fresh, but really should use teas, tinctures, should do it fresh, dried. When should you add it? We'll talk about that tonight. So kind of two ideas. One could be the hot edition, just add it to your boil, or if it's like juniper branches, you could add it to the mash. Or you can do a cold edition. So as you're fermenting or even at kegging time. So some ways to add it, you can make a tea first, like a small amount of water with your large amount of herbs. This gives you more control of the flavor, like you can taste it before you add it. And if you're dry hopping like at a later time, this is how I dry hop in a more like sanitary way. So it's not just the leaves being tossed in. I boil up some water first, put the herbs in, let it cool, and then dump that tea in. You could do tinctures. You could do fresh, which I highly recommend, or you could do dried, especially if you're buying herbs online. Dried's totally fine. And I know John mentioned I should try dried herbs if I'm getting too much of a veggie flavor. And then also roasted is an idea. If it's something that's tougher, or if it's roots, or if it's wood, maybe try roasting it and then adding it whenever you think is right. All right, and question, hops or no hops? And go and take a look at that meme first while I drink. So first off, hops are an herb. So are you already making herbal beer? Yes. Is it just one type of herb? Yes. Um, you could add it in with herbs, or you could totally switch it out for another type of herb. Nothing against hops. Most of what I make are with hops. Let's see. Oh, so one idea that's thrown around a lot is hops are the preservative. I would argue that hops are a preservative. So as long as your brewing practices are clean, there's no observable mold on things, you're probably not going to get an infection because a lot of those herbs are preservatives. Or if you're worried, you could always use like a small amount of really mild beginning of the boil. And of course, you can add the two together. Like the one I have tonight is about half hops, half herbs, and it's really good. So how much is too much? We're going to get into like how much should I be using? There is no correct answer. So the only like terrible beer I've made with herbs is a lavender beer. I was stoked. I was like, yes, I believe in this herbal healing. And so I was like, I really need some lavender in my life. And I put, how much did I put 4 ounces in like a wit beer, and it was terrible. And I used lavender soap. So it just smells like I'm in the shower, and it's just that's the only time I've gone too much. All my other ones have been great, or just kind of like, maybe I should change it a little bit. So really like go for it. If it's green, if it's floral, be careful. When to add herbs, this is the biggest question mark because it still is a question mark. Really, you should experiment. Suggestions, like if it's really delicate, don't do a long boil, or maybe even avoid the boil like at all. Or if it's like something really woody, or something that could withstand that, try the beginning of the boil. Who knows? Try it in the mash, experiment. And then one more idea is like you can think about it like hops, but all like the science behind when to put hops in is like for hops. So like that might work for that, things that are similar, or it might be like totally opposite. Maybe a longer boil gives you more flavor. Who knows? All right, so this is not for you to read through tonight. I'm going to put this PowerPoint up on our Facebook group. So if you want some of these references, this one's out of Eclectic IPA. There's more charts for like fruits. I just did herbs on this one. This talks about like when to add it. That's really helpful out of this book. And then kind of like issues or attributes, or even should I use it fresh or dried? So I've got all these, don't have to look at it tonight. Speed read, I just put it on there so you can find it later. There's a lot because there's 20 million herbs. Same thing, I went through all of like the reference books I have that like I would recommend. So you guys probably have this book, but here's the quick chart if you need it. Same thing, Extreme Brewing has some interesting recipes for herbal stuff, and they had suggestions for amount and time. And then this is my big reference book that is my favorite. So this is Sacred Herbal Healing Beers. This is written by Stephen Heron Buhner, and he's not actually a brewer. He's an herbalist, and he's done all types of herbalism, and has 20 million books. And this is his one brewing book. And it's about how fermentation interacts with that herb, and then historical ideas behind that, cultural ideas behind that. But he basically did anything historical. And so this is where I go to for amounts. Like I open this book first, but I ignore the grain recipe. He's not a brewer. He just does like use pale extract and use yeast. He doesn't tell you what yeast to use either, but that's a really good list to have.
Kelly, and then, on that last screen, are those amounts for like a 5-gallon?
Yes. And I'll write that down. Tonight I'll double check because some of them might be for a 1 gallon. So before I post my PowerPoint on our group, I'll double check those amounts. And then just examples of recipes. So out of the eclectic IPA, the Jasmine IPA is one's the only one I've tried. It's really good. It tastes like, and it's by Dick Cantwell. It tastes like his recipe at the commercial brewery. If you're interested in marijuana, tamarind, rosemary, there's some really good ones in here. And then, John Slate, let me borrow this book. I'm going to buy it for myself. If you like vegetables, fruits, anything in season, this is the Homebrewers Almanac, and it goes season by season. And it's got some really interesting recipes. If you're interested in that one, I would totally recommend it. All right, so adding herbs to your recipe, some ideas. Use what you already grow. Use your nose and senses. It'd be like picking out hops. What does it smell like? What do you think it'll taste like? A really easy way to do this is to use tea blends. So it's already like pre-measured. You can already taste it. Like try a cup of tea first, see if you like it. And then when you are thinking about, should I replace the hops or add to the hops? Think about the smell, taste. Does it have any preservative qualities? You can look that up on Google. And what bitter qualities does it have? So like, can it replace a hop? You can combine hops and herbs, make a tea to test the flavor. Definitely consider the base style. This group's really good at that, kind of like, oh, I have these hops, what base style should I go with? Like kind of reverse engineering things. So same thing with this. Use herbal tea recipes for inspiration. So there's not a lot of herbal like recipe books. So I go to herbal tea recipe books instead. And then consider how brewing in the ferment, brewing it or like doing it after ferment might affect the flavor. And then also use historical recipes. There's some really cool old books that like have unique recipes in them. And you can find most of the weird herbs online somewhere. But I need a beer break, and I already planned on this, and I'm a teacher, so I'm going to put on some music, and you guys go refill your glasses, and I'll be back. Oh no, sorry.
From the bonny bells of heather, they brewed a drink lang syne. 'Twas sweeter far than honey, 'twas stronger far than wine. They brewed it and they drank it, and lay in a blessed swoon, for days and days together in their dwellings underground. There rose a king in Scotland, a fell man to his foes. He smote the Picts in battle, he hunted them like roes. O'er miles of the Red Mountain he hunted as they fled, and strewed the dwarfish bodies of the dying and the dead. Summer came in the country, red was the heather bell, but the manner of the brewing was none alive to tell. In graves that were like children's on many a mountain head, the brewsters of the heather lay numbered with the dead. The king in the red moorland rode on summer's day. The bees hummed and the curlews cried beside the way. The king rode and was angry, black was his brow and pale, to rule in the land of the heather and lack the heather ale. It fortuned that his vassals, riding free on the heath, came on a stone that was fallen and vermin hid beneath. Rudely plucked from their hiding, never a word they spoke. A son and his aged father, last of the dwarfish folk. The king sat high on his charger, he looked at the little men, and the dwarfish swarthy couple looked at the king again. Down by the shore he had them, and there on the giddy brink, I will give ye life, ye vermin, for the secret of the drink. There stood the son and father, and looked high and low. The heather was red around them, the sea rumbled below. And up and spoke the father, shrill was his voice to hear. I have a word in private a word for the royal ear.
All right. So if you haven't heard that one, that's the Heather Ale by Robert Louis Stevenson, an old poem. And just if you know all the lyrics of the story, there wasn't like a big war where all the picks died, because they're like, all the picks died and we lost all the brewers. They just like spread out during history. There wasn't like a big actual battle. Fun fact. But the king rode and was angry, black was his brow and pale, to rule in the land of heather and lack the heather ale. Oops. How do I go forward? Boom. So we get into my favorite part, recipes. These are 3 that I really like that I've brewed, and I have reasons for brewing them. So first is my Scottish Heather Ale, which is what I just poured. Is pretty. And this one's actually about like 5-6 months old, and it's aging very well. No sourness. And this is like the only true Gruits I brew, the one that doesn't have any hops. So this one, my goal was a historical brew. I like the song. I was like, this sounds cool. So I did heather for aromatic, sweet gale for bittering, and then meadow sweet for the astringent. It's aromatic. It's very sweet smell. And for the tannic as well, for the mouthfeel. So sweet gale has been a part of brewing history in England, Scotland, and Ireland. And then Bronze Age vessels have been found with remnants of honey, malt, heather, sweet gale, meadow sweet. So that's what I was going. I didn't add any honey, but that's what I was going for. Let's see, an addition to this recipe that could have happened would be peated malt, but I did not go with peated malt. So here's my Scottish ale recipe. Only the heather was from the garden. Everything else was off Amazon. So the meadow sweet and sweet gale, just nice basic Scottish recipe. Added the herbs, took out the hops, and it's really good. This one's my favorite. This is Borage IPA. Goal is actually, and I don't know. So sometimes I believe like, oh yeah, the medicinal benefits of herbs totally work. And sometimes I'm like, no, that's BS, but it's good for the brain anyways to like think good thoughts. So maybe it works. But borage is a really traditional brewing herb from way back when. And it's also used in salads, is used during like depression times. If you're making like a dandelion salad, you might add some borage to it. But some quotes: it comforts the heart, cheers melancholy, and revives the fainting spirits. So claims, medical claims, and some of these like have some research behind it, some of them don't. So maybe it's good for the adrenal glands, mostly as an anti-inflammatory, and it does have gamma-linolenic acid in it, which is the anti-inflammatory. And then it's viscous, so it soothes mucus. And then some claims is that it's calming and antidepressant, but there's no proof for that. Some of these do have warnings with them. So one thing when doing herbal beers is you want to Google it. So whatever herb you're using, what I do is I type the herb name and then I go medical information, or I go the herb name allergies, or just however you want to Google it, double check these. So like borage, if you have liver disease, you should not eat borage. Borage also has like increases blood flow, so there's more risk of bleeding. So like you don't want to drink it before or after you have surgery, or if you take like NSAIDs, or if you're going to have anesthesia sometime, there's some other medications that interact with my lovely herbal brews. So double check just what your medical needs are with these interesting things. Oh, and fun fact, so hops, the main thing that apparently it affects is hormones and female hormones. So like if you need help with your change in life, they tell women like in their 50s they should drink beer because hops help with that. So here's Oh, I forgot to delete a slide. Here's my recipe for this. So borage has the cucumber peel flavor. It's really strong, bitter flavor. So I balanced that out with Galena hops, which are super fruity, Galaxy hops, given that tropical fruit. And then I fermented it hot with the Viking yeast because I still needed more balance. So I got some feedback last summer on this, and they said it's good, but it's still too bitter. So I really had to think about this recipe. How do I want to do that? Just as far as grain bill, like if you want to feature your herbs, go simple. If you want something fun, really whatever you're used to. Wait, so my last one, my examples. This is a lemon balm, basic pale ale. Gold lemon balm aroma. It just smells amazing. So I wanted to capture that. Lemon balm causeth the mind and heart to become merry. It's really quite a lovely plant. So again, there's like possible health benefits, but also possible side effects. So you always want to check, like, is this the right herb for me? What am I putting in my body? And here's the recipe for that one. So basic pale ale recipe. And then I went with Azaka, which does have that citrus, a little bit of fruits, and then of course Centennial for that citrus. And I love the Viking yeast. I did this one at room temperature because I didn't want so much flavor out of it. And this one is really good too. Words of caution, we're getting towards the end of my presentation. Something I've been thinking about is maybe keep an eye on pH levels, like if you add a lot of vegetation. I was wondering that because I had a mint wine and it didn't ferment fully. And I was wondering if it like was with that. That's more of a question mark for me. If you guys have any info on that. And then consider sanitization. So you have to be really clean if you're not like putting those herbs into the boil. You have to think about how am I going to get in there without infecting my brew. Be careful planting invasive species. Example would be mint. Be aware that some brew herbs, and you'll find these in old recipes, have hallucinogenic properties, like wormwood or really anything that might go into like absinthe. There's a lot of herbs like that. And then check medication interactions, like a common one in St. John's wort. Interacts with a lot of medications. And then research those medicinal properties, like peppermint's a blood thinner. So maybe you want that, maybe you don't. And yarrow is a blood coagulant. So we can have totally opposite interactions. Be aware of look-alike plants. So like poison hemlock versus angelica, or if you're doing any sort of foraging where you're not quite sure. And then also, like before you plant, research if it's poisonous, especially for your pets. Like where are you putting those plants? And then I'll leave you with a song of 8 ales. This one inspires me to make all of these 8 ales and invite everyone over. So we went into the house of one John Pinners, a man that lives among a crew of sinners. And there 8 several sorts of ale we had, all able to make one stark drunk or mad. But I with courage bravely flinched not, and gave the town leave to discharge the shot. We had at one time set upon the table good old hyssop, 'twas not Aesop fable. Then had we ale of sage, and ale of malt, and ale of wormwood that could make one halt, with ale of rosemary and betony, and 2 ales more, or else I must lie. But to conclude this drinking ale tale, we had a sort of ale called scurvy ale, by John Taylor, 1620. So here's my resources. I already showed you all the books I love. And thank you for coming to my beer talk. Cheers. And then you have to look at my memes. Cheers. And then group discussion. So as always, like, do you have any knowledge you'd like to share? Anything I glossed over or maybe had wrong? I don't know. I've only been brewing a year and a half. What questions do you have that we can answer? And we as in everybody. Do you have any commercial Gruits or herbal beers that are worth mentioning? Like that Jasmine IPA, Or do you have any Gruit or herbal recipes that you've brewed and you really like?
I was curious about your lavender beer because lavender is probably my favorite smell in the world, honestly. And I've made one lavender saison that also didn't taste good. It tasted like soap. So I was just wondering if you were to do a lavender beer again, what would you change?
One of the books mentioned to try the leaves instead of the flower because the leaves are aromatic too, but less so. So I'm going to try that next time.
And
I
like,
can give one lavender suggestion. We used it in a Randall, so we at the end of the serving line, and that turned out pretty good. It wasn't too strong. We had it mixed with rose hips,
Oh, that would
but it
be
didn't turn out all grandma-y.
I've done a lavender Hefeweizen before, and my advice would be to use the culinary stuff, which is the French, I believe. And then my second advice is use a very small amount. Literally a couple grams will impart a lot of flavor to your beer. And you just want a hint of that lavender. You don't want to make soap. So don't use.
Thank you, John.
and then I think
We
Beth asked
should
a
have
question about-
talked.
I think Beth, didn't you ask a question about like the dosage rates? Kelly, you had a chart from
From-
I don't know what book it was, but was that for a 5-gallon bag?
Yeah, so I'm going to check tonight. Because
Okay,
there's not
that's-
actually a chart in the book. Like I went through the book and like section by section. So I'll have to check later tonight, and then I'll update it before I post it, my PowerPoint.
Also, if you want to use or experiment with making a beer that features some herbs, I think I have just about everything that Kelly mentioned growing on my hill. So if you want to try something, come over, you might find it.
That I'm excited to come raid your herb garden.
Yes, come take what you want, Kelly.
I have a Heather question. Have you used both the flowering tips as well as like the green stems?
I just use the flowering tips.
It's traditionally just a flower, but I think you could try and use the stems like you would juniper. In a
Right, I've
Quebec.
never tried it. I wonder if anybody else had.
Nope. Definitely an interesting idea.
So I haven't tried it, but I've heard in, I want to say it's wit beers, people will sometimes use chamomile. And
Yes.
use like basically just use like chamomile tea packets and just throw those. I love chamomile, and so that's something I want to try.
Yeah, and you could add that in, like if you do coriander, just do that at the same time.
Mhm.
I grow it fresh on my hill and then I dry it and then I put it in my wit beer at flame out, and it works out pretty well. And again, you want to use some discretion with how much you add, or you will make a chamomile beer, not a wit beer.
I mean, that sounds perfect for drinking right before bed. Like a summer version of my sleepy time tea.
Yeah.
I heard that tip from Randy Mosier, who was obsessed with wit beer. And
I
they
think-
said, what's your one secret or tip you would give anybody, Randy, if you were going to tell them to make a wit? And he said, put a pinch of chamomile in it. So I started doing that, and I haven't gone back since. It just is that perfect touch. I've done
So
a
here's my-
basil saison. I've
Here's
done a
my
basil saison
question.
too. I've done a basil saison too, but I would, if I redid it, I would use dried basil, fresh basil that I dried, and then I would use the dried basil in flame out I did it, and the basil saison was great for about 2 days, and then it turned into vegetable soup. So that's why I'm a proponent of drying the herbs first to get some of that vegetal matter out of there.
Well, and with using dried herbs in brewing, I would assume it's the same as dried herbs in cooking, where the dried herb, it's a much more concentrated flavor. So basically imagine like if you're taking the amount you would use in a fresh recipe, or if you're using a fresh herb in a recipe, and then you can take all the liquid out, like,
I
it's
think
like you need like 2 tablespoons of fresh basil, but it's like a little teaspoon of dry basil.
it's like 25%.
But I think basil's more like parsley. Once it's dried, there's almost nothing left there. That's just my opinion.
I think it also depends how long it sits around. Like this is going to sound stupid, but like a fresh dried herb or a recently dried herb is going to have more flavor than like, I went to Safeway and I bought dried parsley, which just looks like green confetti now, basically.
No, I'm talking about ones that I just hung up like, 3 days earlier, 4 days in the sun, or whatever it took to dry. And there's some like oregano, which become very concentrated, and some like basil that's, unless it's Thai basil, it's got like almost nothing left other than a little licorice maybe, but if it's Greek. But
I don't know about basil. I know parsley has almost no flavor after you dry it. It's just, it looks pretty. Green confetti.
So my question is at what point do we, like, is a little bit okay to affect the flavor for a competition? And then at what point do you hit that line where it becomes a spice or veg?
I have such a hard time with that. I bring my beers to like everyone, like, what category does this go in? And it's tough. I don't know.
I think if you don't tell anybody what you put in it, they won't suspect it necessarily that there's an herb in there. Like if you hit a really low dose and you don't mention that you added an herb, you can enter it in almost any category, because people will be like, wow, there's this awesome like herbal note to it that I can't describe or whatever, because you didn't mention to them what herb you put in it. So I think if you're just sneaky about it and you don't write it down, you can get away with a lot.
I think a lot of it's going to depend on, are you trying to make the herb the star of the beer, or are you just trying to use it to be that little extra oomph, like to set your beer apart? So like if I'm making a wit beer and I'm going to put a little chamomile in it, I think it's the line between this is a chamomile wit beer and this is just a wit beer that has this extra little flair.
I like Tim's little salt bay going on over there.
I came late, so maybe this was mentioned earlier, but is tincture considered cheating here? Or is that a good way to get herbal flavors?
It's a great way to get herbal flavors. And like, I mean, they're great because like it's sterile. And then also like if you grow your own herbs, but they're not around in the winter, that's a way to preserve your herbs for later. That's a really traditional method to do it.
That might also be a better way to get some of that kind of more fresh herb flavor. Like, I feel like a basil tincture is gonna last better than maybe just that dry or like a fresh basil. And maybe that's another way to get around some of that green vegetal flavor, is to make a tincture.
Maybe.
I learned to dose a keg too, as Matt Hibbs will tell you.
Yeah, I did that Italian blend tincture for my pizza beer for a couple of years, and I think I only did 2 or 3 tinctures, but I used them over the, God, I can't believe it. I think I made that beer over 2 years. But the tinctures always held up really well. But the one thing that I liked was I don't think you're going to get like the health benefits or any of those traits as much. I'm not sure, Kelly.
I don't know. It's all
I don't
good.
know either. I don't think that soaking anything in vodka, you're going to extract like healthy. I don't know, maybe you will, but Tim, to answer your question, I highly recommend it. Because then you can just nail it. You can nail it. As long as you don't go over that threshold that you're looking for, you can always nail it. And you can go recreate the blend. And it might not be the same intensity as the last one. That's why everyone's like, how much? So if I make my own tincture, how much do I put in? And I'm like, it depends on the tincture, you know? That's always kind of the hardest part. That's kind of where you gotta kind of have that blending aspect to it, where I always try to dose similar beers beforehand to kind of get a ballpark idea.
I would say if you don't use it for lavender, you're never going to get where you want to be, because you're always going to use too much lavender.
Lavender's a tough one.
I've got a couple friends who do professional, brewing. I'm sure we all do, but I've talked to them about like, hey, how would I get away from tinctures on a professional scale? And what quite a few people who dabble in those exotic flavors do is they have something that they can recirculate into. They can purge and then recirculate, and then they're just checking it, maybe hourly, maybe every couple hours, until they get the desired flavors. And I've even heard of home brewers doing it, but I have not figured out how to engineer something to recirculate from a fermenter to, let's just say a jar. I've heard of people using jars and being able to purge all of that of oxygen. And then, I've heard of people using like any kind of pump or whatever, small pump, like a aquarium pump. But I just haven't figured out how to engineer that for myself. Or I would start experimenting with that too. I mean, that can be good for dry hopping or any of these herbal additions. If you could recirculate them and then just, you go to taste it every couple hours and then like, oh, hey, it's where I want it, stop it. That would be the ultimate game changer.
Well, if you went from
That is
fermenter
why
to
you
a
fail.
randle and then from the randle back into the fermenter, you could get that cycle going.
My concern there would just be purging that whole entire system with CO2. And I mean, but yeah, once you figure that out, you're off to the races. Something similar, yeah.
You can also just do a herb batch in half of, split your brew day into 2 kegs. If you're doing 10 gallons, do 5 gallons, only dose 1. And then if that's too strong, you can mix it with what's left in the other keg into another serving keg. And that's the easiest way, I think, to blend it.
Smart.
I know we were talking a little bit about the medicinal qualities, and a lot of our modern day medicines are derived from these herbs, and that's why the Amazon is such a treasure. It's because there's so many plants that we don't even know half of what they can do. Like heart attack medicine is derived from poisonous frogs, and things like that. But I think at the level of like 5 gallons of beer and like an ounce of herbs, yes, there could be some side effects if you're drinking the whole thing, but the levels of dosage you need with the raw herbs to actually get medicinal benefits, it has to be like a continuous thing that you build over time. It's not something like you have one beer and then, I mean, it's possible. Anything's possible, but
Well, and
from my life of having herbal remedies and everything, it takes